What's happening team? Liam from Lazarus Personal Training. And while this video is about fitness and about working out and about the gym, it's also about wrestling. And in this video, I'm going to look at what wrestlers and us wrestlers can learn from drag queens and Drag Race. Now, if you don't know what Drag Race is, I'm basing this off of RuPaul's Drag Race, RuPaul's Drag Race UK and Canada's Drag Race. It's a TV series where drag queens compete to be the next top drag queen. It's a long running series now. I think it's season 12 of RuPaul. There is 5 all-star seasons. There's been a season of UK Drag Race and there is a season currently going on of Canada's Drag Race. Shout out to Lemon, definitely going to win. Now, I'm not typically the sort of person that I think you would expect to be into Drag Race. Full credit to Ella for getting me into it. I am hooked. We are watching every season as it comes out. I love it. And the more that I've talked about it on my social medias, the more that I've realised that actually there's quite a lot of wrestlers and people involved in wrestling that absolutely love Drag Race. And from an outside point of view, that doesn't particularly make sense. But then when you look at it and you look at what happens on both of these aspects, when we look at wrestling, it's entertaining, full of drama, and there is a competition when you put one person against another person to see who's going to win. And then when we look at Drag Race, it's entertaining, it's full of drama, and there's a competition between one person and another person to see who is going to win. There are a ton of similarities between the two, and I think that as wrestlers we can learn quite a lot from watching Drag Race and put that into our wrestling. Now, as a word of warning, my experience in terms of the drag world is very much RuPaul's Drag Race, and I don't know much under that. And I feel like this is when people talk about wrestling and only talk about WWE. I know there is a world of independent drag out there, which I'm sure is absolutely class. I just don't know it, and I've just not been introduced to it. In the same way that there is a world of independent wrestling out there, some people just don't know about it, and some people just haven't been experienced or haven't had the chance to experience it yet. But we'll get there. I'll find out more about it. I'll get ingrained. We're going to Drag Fest UK in March, hopefully, so that should be an experience. I'm really looking forward to it. To get us started, I'm going to go through a couple of points that I think we as wrestlers could do with looking at and using ourselves. So point number 1 is the character. Every person that appears on Drag Race has some element of character. They have a product that they present and sell every single time that they are on screen. And the ones that are memorable are the ones that have that character on lock. And the ones that we forget about don't really have that in place. So as an example, if we're looking at the last All-Star winner, Shea Coulee, she doesn't particularly have a defined character, but her name, the way that she presents herself on the runway, her challenges, the way that her green screen talking head bits come off, all present this character of being fluid, of being smooth, of being really high class and professional and very intricate on every single thing that she does. She presents herself as a main eventer. She was a runner-up in her season, which then gave more fire for her All-Star run, where that entire season was basically Shea going, I'm going to win this because I need to win this more than anything else in the world. Now, does that not remind you of Stone Cold Steve Austin, who, while not being a massive character in his look, in his name, in his promos, in the way that he wrestled, everything about him had a distinct character. And when it came to WrestleMania 17 against The Rock, where he needed that belt more than anything and would do anything to get that belt, are there not similarities between those two things? And can we not look at those two things in comparison? To go on a different tangent when we're looking more at characters, I think Alaska does a fantastic job of creating what is almost this alien persona while staying human, while having a humanity in her, still presents this otherworldly being from her makeup, from her dress, from her songs after Drag Race, and like things like her voice are just slightly off, which then create this persona that people are very much drawn to. If we look at British wrestling, I think Shreddy does a fantastic job of also doing that, of being a character but still having humanity under it. His name, his look, the way that he wrestles in the ring, his promos, all present this jacked bodybuilder. But then we look at his profile at the moment where he's doing a lot more Pokemon stuff, still has that element of Shreddy in there. But now it has a slightly different persona to it, and there's a bit more humanity that comes through it. And I think Shreddy's done a great job of keeping that brand present. So as wrestlers, we need to ask ourselves, do we have that brand? Do we have something that, as name, as tagline, as ring gear, entrance music, in-ring ability, do they all sit together? And it might not be. I know that I don't have that unlock yet, but it's something that I'm working towards, and I think it's something that a lot of wrestlers can work towards as well. Point number 2 is about the journey. So with this, if I'm looking at last season's RuPaul's Drag Race, Crystal Method went on a fantastic journey through that season, being in the bottom at the beginning and almost looking like she was just going to be another face that appeared. But her journey, the way that she improved herself, listened to critiques, grew that way, found her persona and found the thing that made her Crystal Method, got her into the final, put her up on that stage, and got a lot of people, myself included, going from Crystal's going to go next week to actually rooting for her in the final. The Nelly Furtado I'm Like a Bird performance was class and just on brand and on point for Crystal Method. So sometimes we worry about what our final product is, but actually it's about the journey that we go through. And I don't think anybody exudes this more than Joe Nelson, who has just risen through the ranks of British wrestling from literally being a child to doing ring crew stuff to finally getting onto shows to wrestling some of the biggest names in wrestling to now going into the Lycos gym stuff where he's got the mask on, and his next evolution out of that I think is just going to skyrocket him. For me, from seeing Joe as literally an 8-9-year-old, I might even be doing him injustice there, to what he is today is a fantastic growth. And again, sometimes I think people worry about the finished product, but what Joe Nelson has done has just grown and just presented himself and just listened to people that are his more experienced peers, and then developed from that. Point number 3 is about the match. So when it comes to RuPaul's Drag Race, the match is the lip sync at the end. This is what the show is built to. It's a culmination of the episode where 2 drag race artists or 2 drag queens come together to perform a song, and then the winner stays and the loser goes. Or if it's on All Star, the winner gets to pick the person that's going. The new rules were really confusing, at least to begin with, but anyway, beside the point. I tweeted recently that the Canada's Drag Race lip sync between Priyanka and Kiara was a classic example of moments versus moves in wrestling. So to go into that in a little bit more detail, I can't remember what the song is, but in watching it, Priyanka is hitting moments in the song. She's reacting to the song. She's building with the song, and you are just drawn to her. Kiara, on the other hand, is just hitting moves. She's hitting them on beat, and it's there, but she's just hitting moves. And she's impressive. She's a great dancer, but it just didn't hold up to the same level that Priyanka put herself on. To compare that to wrestling, one of my favourite matches, and I've alluded to this a little bit earlier on, The Rock, Stone Cold, WrestleMania 17, one of the best matches of all time. And with that, there are so many moments in that match that just stand out and sit in your head. We compare that to PWG in 2013-2014, which prime era PWG, I absolutely love it. I've got stacks and stacks of DVDs downstairs of that era. I love that indie wrestling period. However, if you ask me to talk about a match from that point, I can't really do it. There is a general vibe that I bought into and I loved, but when it comes to a match, Stone Cold and The Rock stands out far, far more. What I want people to think about is, are we just doing moves for the sake of moves, or are we doing moves that hit the moments of the match? Because that is going to stand out way, way more. And they don't have to be the fanciest moves, they don't have to be the biggest moves in the world, they just have to be moves that make a moment. And that's not to disregard indie wrestling, and that's not to say that Kiara isn't a great dancer. They're both excellent. It's just a case of what is more memorable and what's going to stand out for longer. It's moments. And then finally, point number 4 is thinking about the card. So when we look at a drag race lineup from the beginning and you see everybody coming through the door and they say their little line and they've got the costume on, drag, they've got the dress, whatever it is, we then start to build up a picture of what that person is. We then look at the 11, 12 drag queens that are sat in the room, and there are comedy queens and pageant queens and dancing queens, and there are bigger queens and smaller queens, and there's kooky ones, and there's a whole variety of people that sit in that block. And then there's some that are very similar. There's a couple of pageant queens, there's a couple of comedy queens, there's a couple of dancing queens. So with that, if we look at a card that we're on, it needs variety, and we need to be able to pick out something that we are that stands out from everybody else. But on the same point, don't worry if you are doing something that is similar to someone else, because there will be differences within you. But with that, you need to be able to define what those differences are. Why does that make you different from someone else? So as an example from the last season, I actually think that Gigi Good and Jada Essence Hall were actually very, very similar in how they presented themselves, their dancing, their ability, their comedy, but there were differences. And with that, we need to look at what our wrestling is. Do we have similarities to people? Do we have enough differences that come through that to then give a card, a show for the paying customers, enough variety that they can go, cool, I like this guy and I like this girl and I like that. And there's a big variety of stuff on there. For me, I have queens that I like and queens that I'm not too fond of, and that's absolutely fine. I'm going to watch the show because I enjoy the show. Someone may come to a wrestling show and they might enjoy a certain type of wrestling and not so much another type of wrestling. But if the card has a variety and you can be a part of that variety act, the people will come to the show and we will have an audience there, hopefully, once Corona finishes, if it ever finishes. So to conclude, I think that as wrestlers, we can learn so much from the world of drag, and there's also other things that we can learn from to improve our wrestling. It doesn't just have to be wrestling. For example, I absolutely adore Geordie Shore, and I think if we look at Geordie Shore, and this is a video for another time, there are similarities to wrestling again. So as a final point to think about, if you are an aspiring wrestler, if you're a wrestler in training, if you're someone that just feels like they need a bit of a tweak, look at things outside of wrestling, because more often than not that will spark an idea that then creates your wrestling persona far more than watching matches could ever do. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop me a comment down below and let me know if you watch Drag Race and who's your favourite drag queen. And again, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel because it massively helps. I've been Liam from Lazarus Personal Training and I will see you next time.